SANIBONANI, MOLWENI, Unjani. How are you guys doing? Are you okay? Today's episode is amazing. It's the first one for this year, season 2. And we speak to, or rather I, and then we all of us will listen and gather information and learn stuff. We speak to Sharon Cox. She is the Health and Support Services Manager at Triangle Project, which is an amazing organization. Go and check out their Facebook page. I'll link everything in the description box below and also more information at the end of the video. I hope you have an amazing time listening and learning like I did as well. And also thank you very much for watching. Have a great day. My name is Keisha Lee, and I'm your host for Take It All. Miss Sharon, can you tell us where you are and stuff and what you do?
So, I am Sharon Cox. I'm the Health and Support Services Manager at Triangle Project. Triangle Project will be 40 this year. And yeah, we've been around a long time. Triangle Project is a human rights, social justice organization with a focus on LGBTIQ plus people and their allies and support structures. We're an organization that's predominantly made up of 3 program areas. There's mine, which is the Health and Support Service program. And then there is the Community Engagement Program, and then we have the Research, Advocacy and Policy Program. And then training is basically held in my program area. And then I also hold the hate crimes monitoring and prepare victims for court cases, work alongside the criminal justice system with victims in hate crimes. And so everything that goes around hate crimes monitoring and victim preparation and support through cases is what I do.
Wow.
So that's basically the broad bird's eye view of the organization.
I didn't hear about Triangle until literally a few months ago, last year. And I think what you guys do is absolutely tremendous. Thank you very much. So I guess we're going to jump into the first question is, what is gender? This gender identity, what is it and where does it come from? Apparently there are so many from the usual 2 that we hear about. Are there more than 2 genders?
Yeah. So I think we are all raised with this binary notion of everything. So we are either male or we are female. We are either gay or we're straight. We're all raised, doesn't matter where we come from, we're all raised with this binary notion of life and society. And so I always think of gender as something that is located between our ears, which is different to our heart, which is orientation. So all of us were raised with constructions of gender, because gender is something that is socially constructed. So we were raised with how to be a boy or how to be a girl. And there's very definite ways of how to be in the world. We raise girls and boys differently. We see gender very definitively. And that has played into all of our lives. If we think, for example, of toys that we give girls and toys that we give boys are very distinctive. And they not only come with a gender, but they come with a gender role that teaches us how to be in the world. colors, for example, are gendered. So many things are gendered. And so we need to look, for example, a particular way. But the reality is that many of us don't fall within the way society expects us. You will have a boyfriend, for example, you will want to marry, you will at some stage want to have children, you will look after your husband, you will be nurturing, you will be kind, you will be gentle, you will be caring. Those are kind of the ways that society constructs the feminine and the female. What happens the minute that we fall outside of that? So for is lesbian, for example, all of a sudden we are not conforming to what society expects of us. If, for example, we are assigned male at birth, we have a deep sense, all of us do, have a deep sense of who we are in the world, who we are in ourselves. With every cell of our being, we know who we are. You know who you are. I know who I am. I don't have to second guess myself. I am comfortable in my body as who I am. A person may be assigned male at birth, but may have a deep sense of themselves as female. But society does not accept that. They are pressured into being who society expects them to be. There are people who may grow up and not want to place themselves in a box of being male or female. Perhaps they feel they don't want to be boxed that way. They just want to be seen as who they are. And so things like pronouns come into play, where they don't want the pronoun boxed either, of being labeled as him or her, but as they, as all-encompassing of all of who they experience themselves to be. So gender is far more broad than what we have historically thought it to be, that we fit into these neat boxes of being male or female. We also have seen more recently with younger people. Of course, we have the media, we have people like you who are openly speaking about these subjects now. People are doing more research online, are exposed to more information that say, wait a minute, but that's me. You know, I don't experience myself this way, or I don't feel that way about myself. And so we have more people saying, but, you know, I don't experience myself as female, or I don't experience myself as male. I experience myself as gender non-binary, and the pronouns they fit me better. That's a better fit for me. But society still clings to this notion of binaries and fitting into these neat boxes of being particularly gendered in ways that are very constrictive and hold us to certain standards of behaving in certain ways, of being in the world in certain ways.
Thank you. So I think what I've gathered from that is that I personally have never been able to distinguish between what is binary and non-binary. And I think from what you just said is that non-binary is people who don't associate themselves with one particular gender. They would use the pronouns they and them, and binary would be you want to fit into a box. You classify yourself as female or male. Is that correct?
So, for example, I am assigned female at birth. I am comfortable in my body as female. I see myself as female. I present in the world as female. I use the pronouns she and her. I see myself as a woman. I happen to be lesbian. That's my orientation. And my identity is female. That's who I am. Somebody who is assigned, for example, male at birth, grows up, identifies and knows with every part of their being that who they are and who they see themselves is female. By the way, just taking a step back, so who I am is cisgender, because who I am on the inside and the outside, my biological being and internally, is congruent, they match. So I am cisgender, I am a cisgender woman. Somebody who, for example, is assigned male at birth, but has a deep sense of themselves as female, presents in the world as female, with everything that they are is female. The two are incongruent, so they're not cisgender, they are transgender, but nonetheless are female. So their gender identity is transgender, but they are female. So that is gender, and it is far more fluid. So it's beyond the binaries. It's a spectrum, and we all fall somewhere on the spectrum, but it's far broader than just the male and the female. But we all fall on it somewhere.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned orientation earlier on. I want to speak about that. So, well, in the world and just going through school and university, we've heard about sexuality and sexual orientation. Could you tell me, like, not versus, but like, what is the difference between the two? And how big of a role do they play in our lives in terms of our gender identity?
Right. So, the difference between sexuality and sexual orientation is quite interesting. It's not that massive, but it isn't the same. So sexuality would really refer to one's practices, to one's sexual behavior. So there may be certain things that you enjoy. There may be sexual practices that you enjoy, sexual behaviors, things that you may enjoy. You may have certain fetishes. You may have certain preferences for things that you enjoy sexually. Mm-hmm. That plays into your sexuality. And it's really great to see and hear young people speak openly these days about their sexuality, because these things used to be very well hidden. It's not to say they weren't there, but people didn't used to speak about things like polyamory, about play and sex play and desire and fetishes and things like that. You didn't hear these things openly discussed. You do now, and that speaks to one's sexuality.
I'm so sorry to you.
Sexual.
Could you just explain polyamory for the listeners, pretty please, who might not know what that is?
Polyamory is people for whom so people for whom monogamy is not an option. So monogamy being, if I have a partner and I am monogamous, meaning I am faithful only to that partner and it's only me and that person in a relationship. In polyamory, it may be 3 people, it may be 4 people, it may be, and each person in the primary, I'm not an expert on polyamory, but each person in the primary relationship, so for example, my partner and I are polyamorous, so I have relationships, my partner may have another relationship or relationships, but what is important in polyamory is there is extremely open communication between the primary relationships. There are very clear ground rules between the 2 primary partners in the relationship about what is permissible between the 2 in terms of the other relationships, what is not permissible, around consent, around behaviors, around practices. So there, in those polyamorous relationships, there is a lot of negotiation and renegotiation, and I think what I've seen and heard of speaking to people in polyamorous relationships is they are way more open and have depth and substance to them in terms of communication, because those relationships do not work unless both parties agree to it. So some people may say, oh, it's cheating. No, it's not, because there has to be consent and there has to be really open communication constantly between the primary relationships in order for polyamorous relationships to be able to work. So, you know, if you think of relationships where there are only 2 people in relationships, and you think of the levels of cheating on one another that we see in relationships, which is really high, you know, if we just think of our friends and family, for example, that we know or that we hear about, you know, people straying outside the relationship and one person knows about it and the friend circle know, and, you know, the one in the relationship doesn't know, you know, that happens all the time. And people frown on polyamorous relationships. And yes, it certainly doesn't work for everybody, but in polyamorous relationships, it is not cheating, because there is this communication and the agreement between the primary relationships that there is, you know, there has to be that communication around what the 2 people agree on, that is permissible and what's not permissible.
Thank you very much. Sorry for that disturbing, but you were explaining sexual orientation.
So sexual orientation is our heart. That's who we love. And people often think that it's just lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex. But heterosexual or straight people, that's also a sexual orientation. So a sexual orientation is who we love. And often when people think of, for example, lesbian and gay people, if you ask people what the definition of lesbian is or what the definition of a gay person is, they would say it's a woman who is sexually attracted to another woman. And I don't like that definition, because we are whole human beings. We are emotional beings, we are intellectual beings, we are spiritual beings, we are physical beings. And so I don't want to be defined by who I have sex with or how I have sex. I am so much more than that. I am not just attracted to somebody based on sex. In fact, that may be the least of it. I too want somebody with a brain, somebody who I can have a conversation with, somebody with a sense of humor, somebody with a passion for similar things. They don't have to have the same passions as I have. If I'm a spiritual person, perhaps I want somebody that is that way inclined. Not the same way, but perhaps I want somebody. Not saying I do, but perhaps I do. So it's more than, but often when it comes to lesbian and gay people, society tend to get hooked on this notion of sex, and it becomes all about that, which is sad, honestly, because we are all, doesn't matter who we are in the world, we are all so much more than who we have sex with and how we have sex. So that is our orientation. It's who we love. Bisexual people are people that would say it's not about what is between a person's legs. It's about who the person is. I'm attracted to the person. It's not about what the person happens to be endowed with. I am capable of having a relationship with somebody of the same sex or somebody of the opposite sex. It's not about what's between the person's legs. A straight person, a heterosexual person, is somebody who is attracted in all of those ways to somebody of the opposite sex. Those are orientations. Identity is something different. Transgender is an identity. It's not a sexual orientation. An intersex person is an identity, not an orientation. So a transgender, as I explained, is somebody who perhaps was assigned male at birth, grew up and had a deep sense of themselves as female, presents in the world as female, perhaps chooses to go onto hormones, perhaps chooses, not everybody does, but perhaps chooses to go on to have surgery. In the public health system in this country, it's a 25-year wait period for surgery. Unless you've got a whole lot of money, there's a very long waiting list for surgery. I can just see your face. A long wait list for surgery. So the person may, what we call socially transition, where they present in the world as the gender that they are and go on to hormones. And that in itself makes a big difference, can make a big difference. And then perhaps go onto the waiting list in a public facility. If you live in the Western Cape, you're going to go onto Groote Schuur's list for surgery. Intersex people are very misunderstood, and it is way more common than people think it is. And intersex also happens on a spectrum. So people often think of intersex as somebody that has distinct genitalia of both male and female. That's often how people think of intersex, and that is absolutely not true. Some intersex people may have what we call ambiguous genitalia, where it isn't really very clear. In years gone by, and sadly it still happens in some places, the doctors may make that decision for the parents and perform surgery, which is something that for years activists worked very hard to stop, because that's nothing short of genital mutilation to do that to a child, because you cannot decide for another human being what you're going to do. But it can be many, many variations. So it doesn't even need to be anything to do with the genitalia. It could be chromosomal, hormonal, somebody who is has a female anatomy may grow up, may not start her periods, may seek medical treatment or medical exploration because she's not starting her periods. She may go for a scan, and then they may see there are no ovaries. There may be what we call undescended testes. So there are many variations on the intersex scale. Many variations that, and most of them are not obvious. Most of them are not obvious. Many people only find out that they may be on the intersex scale sometime in their life. They may not have an awareness of it until sometime in their life. So you can see immediately the blurring of those binaries of male and female, that it's not as distinct and clear-cut as people would like to think that it is. Now, with regard to identity, because it's not the same as orientation, a person's identity is different to their orientation, and we all have an identity and we all have an orientation. So a transgender person has an orientation, an intersex person has an orientation. So that is the distinction between identity and orientation. So we say LGBTI, and then sometimes you will see SC. So the LGB is the lesbian, gay, bisexual, TI, transgender and intersex, and SC is sex characteristics, which is obviously often used to denote the intersex person, because it's not always the genitalia. You may see an E used, and that is gender expression or expression, and that's just how we present in the world. Everybody presents in the world differently, whether it be clothing, the manner in which we walk, we talk, we present ourselves in the world. We're complex as human beings, and we're all different as human beings. Thank goodness we are. We're not all the same, but we're all beautifully made in our own way, and yet we discriminate and other people just because we may not fall into what society expects us to be.
So, on the podcast, I had an episode where we did sex and mental health. And in that, we had Casey Blake talk to us about letting in, this concept of letting in and not letting out, and not coming out instead. I want to ask, do you think the transition from coming out to letting in will be an easy one, that it will be something that takes perhaps years for people to get used to, and not saying out of the closet or coming out, and it would be rather letting in? Because I think that is a much better way to put things. Letting in. Coming out sounds very harsh. Letting in sounds much better. Do you think that transition to letting in only will take a while and that people get used to it?
I absolutely loved it when I saw it. I loved it. It's often when I'm doing training with police or nurses or social workers, put this question to the room. LGBTI have never asked for special rights or different rights or none of that. But the day that anybody who is heterosexual has to spend hours upon hours upon hours sitting and thinking and having sleepless nights and writing and rewriting, letters and calling a family meeting and thinking about the consequences and the fallout and the backlash, and having everybody sit down and saying, Mom, Dad, Granny, Uncle, I've got something to tell you. I'm straight.
Yeah.
Transfer that to schools, to friends, to colleagues. If one has never had to take that risk, without fearing alienation of friends, without fearing being ostracized by family, or worse, being kicked out of home by family, one will never know the fear of that. Sometimes it's unfounded. Sometimes you don't lose friends. Sometimes you won't be kicked out by family. But there are the cases where you will.
Yeah.
And my goodness, I think we are still a long way off that concept of letting in. I wish we weren't, and I love the concept of letting in instead of coming out. Because if we have to come out, why does nobody else have to come out? You know, it just shows how othered this is what made me think about that question. It made me think how othered LGBTI people are, that there is even a name for having to be human and having to be yourself, that you have to come out. And even the word strikes fear, or the term strikes fear in people, because it's real for some people that you do stand the risk of alienation, of being pushed aside, and of losing people you love. And that's a real fear for some people, for a lot of people, for many people. And that's why people sometimes never do, sometimes leave it till late in life to be their true selves. Sometimes force themselves to be something that they're not, and then, find the courage much later in life to do it, and then hurt other people in the process of coming out. I love that. I love that letting in as opposed to coming out. And the reality is, I think we're a long way off it.
Unfortunately. So I'm not sure, but I have been hearing the term queer a lot, and then also with that queer community. So I want to understand, is it appropriate to group the LGBT community and say queer community? And then also, what is the queer community? Because I've been hearing the term since forever. I want to know, is it appropriate to use it?
It's one of those strange words, one of those reclaiming words. And I'm not a big fan of the term reclaiming if we never gave it to ourselves in the first place. But it is appropriate now. And I guess in activist circles and in academic circles, you hear it more than you hear it in other places. So queer is often used as an umbrella term to capture all of the LGBTIQ plus, because there are many, 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 many ways that people experience themselves. So the term queer is now an umbrella term to capture all of those terms, right? The word community is the interesting one for me. We never at Triangle use the word community. Why? Because we're not a homogenous group. So I, as a middle-class lesbian living in a suburban area, can go out with my partner in the evening and go and enjoy a drink somewhere and come back and be quite safe. I'm not going to be at the receiving end. I may be at the receiving end of some drunk people's, mouths, for example, but my life's not going to be in danger. However, My colleague who lives in Khayelitsha, who doesn't have a car and who lives in a township area, or my friend who lives in a rural town 2 hours out of Cape Town and who also doesn't drive and who is going to enjoy a few drinks with his friends at a club is not in the same situation as I am. They do have to fear for their lives. They live way different lives to me. I hold a different level of privilege. I have a different level of protection. And I don't have the same life experience. They don't have the same lived experience as me. And that's why we can't use a homogenous word like community as if we were all experiencing the same thing, because the reality is we are not. And if we were using the word community, it meant that we were all in the same boat facing the same storm. And the reality is we are not. We aren't. And the sad reality for me is that if there is somebody murdered in Ceres, for example, and there is a court case and we want people to show up in solidarity, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get solidarity from people from everywhere as if we were a community. You're not. And that's why I think one can't use the term community as if we were a homogenous group.
That's understandable. And that has influenced my restructuring of later questions, actually. The fact that, what you've said has just touched strings. Oh yeah, thank you for that. I will take note of that going on. Thank you very much. So I do want touched on earlier on. You had talked about pronouns, they and them, and she and her. I wanted to know. You explained a bit about why the use of the pronoun. Sorry, I want to know why is it so important? I mean, I have Instagram, so I've been seeing a lot of posts on my friends are trying to use my correct pronouns. So people then use different various methods on how to make your friends remember your correct pronouns. Why are they so important? What makes them so important?
I think they are so important as names are important, as pronouns are important, because they're speaking to who you are. So if you are a transgender woman and I call you by your name because I'm used to your name, and then I call you he, I am disrespecting and disregarding the core of who you are. And yes, people may slip up now and again, and a person can, can forgive that. But often people will do it to make a point, to reinforce it, and do it over and over again. It's a way of showing non-acceptance, like, I don't see you. And in life, all of us just want to be seen for who we are. I don't want to be called him. I am her. I don't want to be called her. I am they. All of us just want to be seen for who we are. And there is nothing more affirming than being called by our name and our correct pronoun. I just want to give you a small example of this. We had a client who was transgender, female name, of course, then pronouns are female, and we had made that clear. The nurse insisted on addressing the person in male pronouns with a female name. And this person was extremely, extremely, extremely ill. And she was lying on her side, and the tears were welling in the corner of her eye. And she said to me, not in these exact words, I'm paraphrasing, "They've taken my dignity." And I thought to myself, this was a person who was unhoused, who was really, really ill, and who was transgender. When dignity is all that you have, when you have nothing else in this world except for your dignity, and they take your dignity away, they've taken everything. You have nothing left. And this is what, when we do training, we try to make clear to people. Do not strip somebody of their dignity. It costs nothing just to try. You know, if you slip up and make a mistake, you slip up and make a mistake. You correct it. But you don't do it purposefully. Persisting and persisting and persisting. That's not going to change anybody. It's not going to change the person that you're addressing. In fact, you're making it worse. Just call somebody by their name. It costs you nothing. And that's why pronouns are important. And if you don't know somebody's pronoun, you just ask.
Thank you very much. So earlier on, you spoke about how a heterosexual person has never gone through, if I may call it, the trauma of having to come out to their family. Can we agree that there is heterosexual privilege in society today?
Oh, yes. Heterosexual privilege that's how society runs. On heterosexual privilege. It is everywhere. That is the basis of our society, is heterosexual privilege. If you are, just as an example, if you are a couple, a heterosexual couple, having problems in your relationship, you can call up a therapist, for example. You don't have to think first, you can have a look through and see, this is a couples therapist. Mm-hmm. This is their speciality. You don't have to first think to yourself, is this person experienced or, are they homophobic or transphobic? Mm-hmm. You can, if you're a spiritual person, you can call up your imam or your priest or your pastor or your rabbi and go and see them. And go and have some spiritual counselling. You don't have to think twice about it. Mm. There are structures in place to support heterosexuality in our world. The same does not exist for LGBTI people. You have to always be thinking. If a parent wants to enroll their child at school and their child is LGBT or I, one has to be constantly thinking ahead. Where would be a suitable place? Mm. That now also plays into race, class, and privilege. Where does a person sometimes most times actually doesn't have the option. You have to go where what is the closest place, where is the closest place? Which district does my child fall under? If you have the resources, and it's a toss-up between do I buy a house or do I send my child to a private school, if you have that kind of money, well, then you can also hedge your bets because not every one of them is going to be receptive to your LGBT or I child. But you have to constantly, in every aspect of one's life, you have to constantly be negotiating these spaces. Every aspect, whether it be school, whether it be faith, whether it be, you name it, you're negotiating it. You are negotiating it every step of the way. But That is what is meant by, well, partly what is meant by heterosexual privilege, because you're not negotiating any of those things.
Yeah.
Because our world is set up for heterosexuals.
Yes, it very much is. So I've recently been taught, or rather been told about acceptance and not understanding. I'm very curious. I want to know every last detail about why, when, and who, and why people are the way they are, and what made them like that. And my uncle told me he is part of the queer. Oh, I wanted to ask you. Yes. So what is the correct term to use? Do I say queer group, LGBTI people? I am.
Yeah, it's fine with me.
Queer group, LGBTI people. So he's also part of
Yeah,
that group of people, and
yeah.
and he told me acceptance. Some things you just can't understand. You'll never understand or even begin to imagine someone's story from conception to changing, transition from maybe gender, this or whatever. Sorry, not whatever, but like the process they've been through. You can't understand that the gravity they of on their story.
Mm.
You just have to accept them who they are. So I have been doing, especially in research for all of this. I want to hopefully extend this accepting over understanding to a lot of people through the platform of the podcast. And I'd like to know if is there anything else besides acceptance, maybe tolerance, but are those the only things we can do to aid in trying to have a society where there isn't prejudice or discrimination against people who are different from us?
You know, I wish there was. I so wish there was. I hope for the day where we see each other as human, that we're all human, that we all have our own stories, whether we are from the queer community, whether we are from the straight or heterosexual community. We all have our stories. We all have our pains, our joys, our struggles. We all come with our own stories. And we all come with something to offer in this world. And by me being who I am, takes away nothing from you being who you are. But unfortunately, all of us have been raised, all of us, no matter who we have all been raised in these binaries in terms of gender, never mind orientation, even just gender. We have all been raised in societies that value one thing above the other. We started our conversation that way. Boys are often valued more than girls. If you were a boy and you came home from school and you were crying, you were given a very different message to a girl who came home from school crying. And everybody can relate to that message. And so the messaging we gave girls and boys were very different. I hate the word tolerance because none of us in this world want to just be tolerated. It has I don't know, it just has a ring to it, tolerance. I don't just want to be tolerated. All of us want to be seen for who we are. And I've often and for a long time struggled with the word homophobia and transphobia, because phobia for me, this is just me personally, homophobia and transphobia, the word phobia indicates that it's a fear. And I very much doubt if somebody just met me somewhere that they feared me. What would there be to fear? I think it's more driven by prejudice. I think it's homo prejudice and trans prejudice. I think it's driven by prejudice. And the prejudice is because 82% of us, if not more, in our South African context, have been raised in some faith, whatever faith. But 82% of us, if not more, have been raised in faith. And faith, culture, and tradition drives prejudice. It's driven prejudice against women. It's driven prejudice against LGBTI people. It's driven prejudice against a lot of things. Apartheid rested on scripture, for example. And so does this. And so does many things. The woman's place in the home. One has to be extremely careful about how we use something from whichever faith we are from. And in this country, it's mostly the Abrahamic faiths. From whichever faith we are from, we have to be really careful how we use something that's main tenets were of love to be so hateful to a group of people based on who they are. And that drives our prejudice. And the thing is, in a society where nowadays we look at Sevendelaan or Mavangu or, you know, a lot of the soapies that include a gay character or transgender character, and the parents are passing comments, or your 3-year-old nephew comes home from school crying and gets told, you know, don't be a morphie. The child doesn't even know what a morphie is. They just know, you know, whatever that is, I don't want to be that. What are the messaging that we are getting from adults? What are the messaging that our children, that our younger generation are getting from adults? That carries on to the next generation. It's the same as race. What are children hearing about race? What are children hearing about orientation, about identity? They then carry that forward and think it's okay to behave in a certain way, to look down at people a certain way if they are of a certain grouping or are of a certain race, of a certain orientation. These are how things are passed generationally from one to the next. So when are we going to have a society free of all of this prejudice, that we discriminate so easily against other people based on who they are, instead of seeing everybody as human beings that all bring something to the table?
That is brilliantly said. I do want to quickly move to an African perspective. So earlier on, I think 25 years waiting list for surgery has really, really taken me aback. Like truly, I am still shocked. And I want to ask you, in that sense, we hear that Africa takes 2 steps back, the world goes 10 steps forward. Is that progress? Is that, I don't know, is that enough progress? Or can we just say it's progress in the least bit? I feel like 25 years is not progress at all, but is it progress?
We've had progress, and I guess we've got to celebrate the small wins, but I don't know. I'm so, you know, where we can say we've had progress in the South African context is that we have legislation in place. What legislation does for us is it gives us the legal framework. So the minute that we have a transgression of the law in terms of the legal framework, we have something to fall back on. What is still lagging more than 25 years behind, what's still lagging and what we still struggle with and why we are still in this predicament, you cannot legislate people's attitudes. You cannot legislate for people's behavior. You cannot legislate for attitudinal change. That's what you can't legislate for. You can, somebody can do something to you, call you a name, kill you, rape you because of who you are. We have fantastic legislation in place, so we can take action with that. But where we cannot take any action or where we struggle is attitudes, people's perceptions, people's attitudes, people's behavior towards the other. That is where we struggle, and that is where we still struggle to make progress. And we will continue to until we have a generation of people who grow up to be adults who are not passing this toxic mess onto their children about any kind of otherness, whether that be race, whether that be ethnicity, whether that be class, where we don't have that passed on to another generation. That's the whole mess that needs to stop. And that's where we're not making progress.
Yeah.
Not making it.
And I like that you mentioned the legal framework, because we're told that we have this world-class constitution in South Africa, yet still we have like so many things that are going wrong in terms of legislation. And I like the fact that you said you cannot legislate people's attitude. That is, but now I want to ask then, since we have this great constitution and we have all these wonderful legal stuffs, are we then moving at the same rate in terms of, like, let's say, international standards for protection of people like this? I feel like that Angola recently just said that they'd decriminalize same-sex marriages. Is that on par with what the global, the international community is doing?
So that's where South Africa is way ahead. I mean, we were one of the first in terms of, if you're talking about same-sex marriage. Okay, I think we sold ourselves a bit short because we have a different act than the Marriage Act. We have the Civil Union Act. But we're way ahead in terms of the fact that it's enshrined in our constitution, and we have it clearly spelt out that there isn't discrimination on the grounds of a whole lot of things, and sexual orientation is in there. Gender identity, we're falling a little short on, but, we're ahead. And that covers us for a lot of access, that covers us for a lot of things that could go wrong. Our problem is attitudes, but also implementation. So, there's still loopholes that people can find. There's still gaps that people can find, and implementation on this and a million other things. Implementation is our problem here, I mean, in Africa, in talk on the continent, 3 out of 5 countries I read, it depends where you read, criminalize homosexuality or outlaw it, or, and they're different sanctions, so some would carry a penalty which would be, a prison sentence, or it varies. But I mean, it's frightening to see how homosexuality and gender identity is curbed and criminalized in so many African countries, which is why we see, a lot of LGBTQI people from other African countries coming to our country, and, finding it extremely, extremely difficult here too, but trying to escape a horrible situation from where they're from, because it really is horrible. Decriminalizing, making same-sex marriage, passing a same-sex marriage act is neither here nor there, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, it is a step forward in terms of equality, but, so you can marry your partner of the same sex. It is a step forward. I'm not undermining it, but, I would like my other freedoms too. I would like that, my colleague in Khayelitsha is safe, that my my brother in series is not gang raped. My sister in Elan Spy is safe and not murdered. That would be nice. I sound very negative now, but it's true.
It's a reality, unfortunately, that we are facing at the moment. I wanted to then ask, how is it possible for I so badly want to be an ally, and I would like to classify myself as an ally for the LGBTQ people and group, sorry. And what can I do? What better can we do as allies, or people who want to become allies? What can we do to make awareness, to draw attention to what else can we do? Are we providing enough support for the LGBTQ people?
I think by doing exactly what you're doing is being a damn good ally. I think speaking about it, speaking up and speaking out, providing education and awareness. It's not an LGBTIQ plus person doing it. It's a person who is an ally. It's having conversations with friends. It's and I can imagine you being the kind of person who does it. It's when you're in a group of friends speaking and somebody passes a remark or is contesting something or being prejudiced or whatever. It's standing your ground and saying, no, that's not okay. It's not being silent because that's being complicit. It's when there is something that takes place that requires social action, that one follows the media and follows, organizations that often are doing, taking part in these social action things, that we have allies as well, that we have society seeing. It's not only LGBTI people. There are human beings everywhere that think this is not okay. That if you are a parent, for example, at a school, and your child is in that school and you know that there is a learner in that school, for example, that's transgender, that you are not silent at the staff meeting or at the parent meeting, or you're a teacher, that you are not silent when the issue is raised and there is discussion around this that often goes quite pear-shaped, that you are the person that it may not directly impact on your life, but that you are not silent around it. That is the big issue for me. The great allies are the ones that in no way does it impact on their lives, yet they do not remain silent on these issues. And that for me makes a good ally. That for me is a good ally.
Thank you very much. I promise this is the last question. Earlier on, you spoke about the message that we give to children. And I want to ask you, I spoke to Dr. Eli Rosen last year about sex education in schools. And I would like to know, I already know that Smart Sexies is one platform of facilitating conversation in schools at that level of getting children to get different message. And obviously they are full of questions. What else, or how else can we get parents to also facilitate the kind of message that we want to give and say that we are all human beings, and sex education is important so that we can go on and grow to be adults who don't make silly prejudice jokes and things like that, and treat people like humans, like everybody else, with dignity.
So this is one area that's really difficult. So Triangle are part of a group of other organizations and of parents who are in discussion with the Department of Basic Education around guidelines of social inclusion in education. Because the reality is, in schools, learners are taught a very heteronormative,
very narrow-minded
curriculum. very narrow, very conservative. And the reality is, whether we like it or not, whether your child is LGBTQI or heterosexual, children are experimenting, exploring, having sex, making good decisions, making poor decisions, making decisions in between. And we can't for 1 minute think that all parents are having these conversations with children, because we've been brought up in societies that we know that are fairly conservative, that think, no, not my child's not doing this. And if you're not having the conversations with children, the TV is, their friends are, somebody is. And the sadness with LGBTIQ plus learners is that often nobody is, or at least nobody except their friends. And if I was the parent of a young LGBTI person, I wouldn't want my child's information to come from a fellow young person. You know, I would want them to have proper information from an adult. And so we've worked very hard on trying to get information, good information, age-appropriate information included in the curriculum. The challenge that we're having is, as long as these remain guidelines and not policies, it will never be included in curriculums. Never. Because we know who has the say in what is implemented in schools and what is not. So yes, you may have schools here and there that will go broadly and do a good, proper job. But we know for a fact that that is in the minority of schools that will do that. And so our children will make bad decisions or will not know, just out of ignorance, because they're not taught. So it's a sadness for me. It's a real sadness for me. You know, a couple of years ago, I had 5 young learners come to me and say, could I, and they had written them down, a whole list of questions about safer sex for lesbians. And they had said they couldn't stay long. They just needed to ask me these questions because they had sex education at school, but nobody spoke about sex between 2 lesbians. And they were really great questions they had. And it just struck me then, as it does now, where are these young learners, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, where are they meant to learn these things if nobody is teaching them? I wouldn't like to leave it, if I had a child, to leave it for another child to teach my child, you know, because you don't know what kind of education that they're getting. Are they getting the correct information or not the correct information? But it's very heterosexist. That's the reality.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful experience and getting to learn. Thank you very much for coming to join me today. I just want you to please tell my listeners, where can we find Triangle Project?
Oh my goodness. Now the best place for information is on our Facebook page, which is Triangle Project. So the Facebook page is the most up to date in terms of information of where to find us. Of course, it's COVID times, and while I'm doing this, I'm finding a telephone number for you. It's COVID time. Our office still isn't open yet because we have staff who are, who have comorbidities, but all of our services still remain. So there's none of our services that are not available. All of our services are available. So I urge your listeners to go on to Triangle Project's Facebook page. You will see all the things that we offer, which is a lot. We have a helpline, we have counselling, we have community groups, we have We have a lot of things. Our contact number I want to give you in the meantime too is 082 780
The 780.
2044.
Right.
So the best place for info is Triangle Project on Facebook, and then the telephone number that I gave you. And you're welcome to inbox us on Facebook. We do get your messages. You're welcome to phone that number or send a WhatsApp or a text, or please call me to that number, and we will see to it that we respond.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What a pleasure it was spending this time with you.
Thank you. You too. You should have a wonderful day and a great week ahead. Thank you so much for your time.